Well, Don, good to see you. It made me think of you when I thought of recording a few more podcast episodes, which I have like 4 or 5 on my YouTube channel. Because one, you've taken a less traditional career path or work path. Two, we actually had the same job. Well, actually, your next job after that job was teaching English in a foreign country. 2 jobs later after that job for me was teaching English in a foreign country.
That's right.
And that happened after some time at the public defender, which you can build on being a public defender. There are substantive skills you learn doing that.
Absolutely.
But what inspired you at that time to just say, I'm going to teach English abroad?
I think I was so frustrated with the criminal justice system in general and the lack of any universal standard that was applied living in St. Simons and going to work in Brunswick every day. I was constantly confronting the overwhelming juxtaposition between the haves and the have-nots there in that community. Anyone that's been to St. Simons and to Brunswick, can show you pretty quickly that those are two radically different places, despite being separated geographically by less than 100 miles. Yeah, whereas at the public defender's office, I would always seeing clients that weren't getting those breaks of that the well-to-do people were experiencing, and it was particularly poignant for me because those people that were getting the breaks, and the leniency kind of, had lived a life up to that point. Not only were they, kind of being shorthanded at that present, but I felt like the life situations leading up to that point, had also been radically different than people. And talked to one of our mutual friends, Steve Mansfield, who was working in the drug court. His office was in the same building as mine, and I went to sat in his office one day and told him, I was like, I don't like what I'm doing. I don't like the drama and the politics that's here. And I have a friend that's going to Thailand to teach English, and I want to go with him. And I asked Steve, I was like, what do you think, man? And he's like, dude, you got to go. He's like, if I was in your shoes, I would have already left. He's like, but he had a wife and a kid, so he didn't have, the luxury that I did of being single, guy with, no mortgage, no wife, no kids. He's like, man, you got to go. He's like, this will always be here. You can come back if you don't find what you're looking for. And I didn't find what I was looking for in Thailand. I found a lot of things, but ultimately, I moved on from that. And, now I'm extremely grateful that I have found, what I was looking for. Although looking back, I don't know that I knew it at the time. I don't know that I knew what I was looking for when I was, laying in bed at night, lamenting my life choices that had led me to working in that public defender's office, or when I was sitting in Steve Mansfield's office, trying to figure out my next move. I don't really know that I knew that I wanted to be an outdoor guy. That came much later in life, but the takeaway that I did leave from that experience was that, life is short, and to believe that, like I believe, this is the only chance that, we have. So you just got to sometimes make that leap. Even though if you can't see the landing, life's just too short to be unhappy.
There was a lot we could go a lot further with there, and I'll touch on all of them. I started out as a public defender as a very much a bleeding heart, and I'm still a bleeding heart in some ways. I wouldn't call myself a bleeding heart liberal, just a bleeding heart. And then I got into the public defender, and I felt like the day-to-day grind, the day-to-day getting fussed at by clients who are in a horrible situation, so who wouldn't be disagreeable at least to deal with. But it wore on me because after 3 months, Grayson, the first guy that hired us, was gone, and our new boss made us go to the jail every day. It was like a jail sentence every day for an hour. So I can relate to what you're saying. And since getting some distance from it and emotionally detaching, I found myself also being very skeptical. Usually I just like the word critical, but very skeptical of the American justice system. I think it's really cruel. I think it's ineffective. And I think we're going to see in the next 100 years, depending on when the ship turns from where it is now, some reforms that will hopefully make us safer. And I think, and like you mentioned, you touched on this briefly. Every time I met somebody's parents, I was like, there is no way this person was ever going to turn out any different than a client of the public defender. And it made me sympathetic, but it also made it was like a neutral understanding of how people develop. And to me, that's where it's got to start is providing opportunities for kids so they don't end up there. Because a lot of the adults that end up in trouble is too late. So I wanted to touch on that. And then you were talking about when you went to Thailand, and I relate because about 3.5 years later, I went to Costa Rica and then I went to China. And like you, I didn't know what I was looking for either. I thought I did. I thought I was going to create like a blog and a YouTube channel, and off I went to passive income life or the content creator life. It still hasn't happened yet, but I realized I was probably running from what I knew to be true about myself intuitively, but I couldn't put my finger on it, couldn't articulate, which is I didn't want to do the job either. Didn't want to practice small town law either. And that there's nothing wrong with that, practicing small town law. I just didn't want to. And then I didn't know what that meant. And so I was in a way trying to create something else entirely, which I don't regret any of it. I'm glad I went to Costa Rica. I had the opportunity to do that. Just like your friend told you, you should go. This will be here when you get back. You have the opportunity, go fucking do it. And so there's a lot. I'm kind of just riffing here, but one, we both had the opportunity to do that, and then two, I think perhaps it was about creating ourselves through travel and living abroad and trying to experience, see if we could thrive or make it in a foreign country for a little while. I feel like you've made it now. You're an outdoor guide. You've successfully cut the cord with law. But I feel like that all goes into it once you find your track, or once you later in life, we were creating ourselves as much as we are finding ourselves, I think. Yeah.
And I think it's telling with that you mentioned like finding yourself, and I feel that every individual or most individuals are doing something along those lines, some more than others, but everybody is simultaneously running away from parts of themselves and also trying to find themselves. And when you're stuck in a situation where you're not fulfilled and you're not finding passion, I feel like it's even harder to identify those areas where you would find that fulfillment. Perhaps you going to Costa Rica and me going to Thailand, maybe that wasn't what our passion and fulfillment was about. But as long as you're bedded down and sleeping with the demons every night, doing something that you're not supposed to do, I think you're just handicapping yourself. You're probably not going to find that passion. And even though my passion was not, teaching English in Thailand, it opened up my brain. It gave me more headspace where I could start exploring and thinking about what is my passion? Because when you're just so busy lamenting your place in life and hating your occupation or the life situation that you found yourself in, you don't have the leisure and the open headspace to really think and explore those options. You're so exhausted at the end of the day. You don't want to do any self-examination. You don't want to, write down a pro and con list of, your options. You just no. I mean, and at the time, I was an alcoholic and I would just turn, devices to kind of make that go away instead of doing the hard work to actually figure out what I want to do. Had I known then what I know now, I think I could have taken a shortcut, but also feel like that road, maybe where I am today, I become more appreciative. But for those people that are struggling, sometimes you need to get out of that, bad situation you're in before you're ever going to find a mental clarity to figure out where you actually want to be.
That's so true, man. That makes me think of the 3 or 4 career coaches I hired to try and help me figure out other jobs to get. And I just remember them presenting me with these worksheets and things that were part of their program and thinking, I'm so tired of this shit. I don't want to think about what are my strengths and weaknesses. I want you to tell me what I'm supposed to do because I don't have the
Yes.
bandwidth for anything else. That is like spot on. And I in fact got like 3 or 4 different career tracks I could have taken from this career coach and then didn't take any of them. I was like, fucking, I'm going to Costa Rica. I don't have the energy to go apply and interview for jobs. And so that's really insightful. In fact, I read this book. I'm not here to plug this book, but I read this clear thinking book. It's really good. And he talks about making decisions from the right place. And it's a lot easier to make good decisions when you're in a good place. That be that emotionally, spiritually, financially. And I think that's what happened. That's what you're talking about too, is that you're in an exhausted place. All you want is some relief, some rest for your brain. It's going to be hard to make a good, solid career decision. And you're right. It definitely got us out of the headspace we were in. Did it get us to the right place? I don't know. I'm glad I did it.
Yeah.
I'm sure you got good takeaways. So there's another question arising from me rambling. What is your best takeaway from when you went to Thailand? And I know you went to other places after that, so you can add those too.
Yeah, I think kind of going off of one thing that you said earlier, this is maybe just an adjunct answer to the question that you just posed. But I have some long distance hiking experience, having done portions of the Appalachian and Pacific Crest Trail. And one thing that you would hear out there, is similar to what you were talking about being a public defender with a bleeding heart. You got into it for what you thought were the right reasons, and then you realize, like, whoa, this isn't exactly what I thought. And that also, occurs on those long distance hiking trails that people think, like, oh, I'm going to hike in the wonderful, beautiful wilderness. It's going to be awesome. And then they don't realize, like, oh, but I'm like, I have wet clothes and I have blisters and I'm eating, tuna packets and ramen. And one thing that is frequently thrown out on those long distance hiking trips is never quit on a bad day. If you're gonna quit, like, quit on a good day when the sun was shining and your feet felt good and you had plenty of food and water. If you still don't like it and you don't want to do it then, okay, then you can leave. But don't quit on a bad day when it's raining, didn't sleep well because you're not in the right headspace. And so I think, like, my biggest takeaway from Thailand was kind of tied into that, into realizing it's very important when you make those decisions that you're in the right headspace. I don't think I was in the right headspace when I left, and although it's probably the right decision, but when I decided to leave Thailand and come back to the States, I was in a much better headspace. I was enjoying what I was doing. I just didn't feel like it was exactly right for me. And so, yeah, just having that mental clarity to know the right time to make a decision. It's not always a good time to make a life changing decision. Like you and I both are familiar, with plant medicine. And that's another thing. It's like, maybe you don't invite or participate in those plant medicine journeys if you're not in the right headspace to fully entertain and absorb that. So I think that was, in Thailand, I kind of had that headspace and that time to figure out more about who I was and what I wanted. And I was making decisions based on passion and fulfillment and not out of frustration.
I love it. I was thinking you were going to come back with something about Thai geography or something logistical. That is such a better answer than a takeaway about like travel insight or something. That is a fantastic answer. And there's that don't make decisions if you're hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Halt. That's spot
Right.
on. And I didn't realize that you had gotten to happiness in Thailand and then decided to come back. Didn't realize that. And then
Yeah.
you took more time after that. You did some other jobs. You went through the underworld of lawyering just like I have, and document review and court appearances after that. But you did some other traveling too, right?
I did. Yeah. I feel like, I would find myself in a position where I would work, like you said, document review or court appearance, professional. And yeah, I would, ride that wave for as long as I could. And then I'd crash and I was like, I got to leave. And so then I would, and I've for years now find that solace and peace of mind, through travel, through solo adventure, through exploring new places. And yeah, and so I kept, I would work until I just couldn't take it anymore, and then I'd pack up my stuff, put it in a storage unit, go somewhere, that would run its course, and then I would come back and repeat the process. And yeah, I find that like now where I have found a place of happiness and contentment, like I don't have a burning desire to like buy that one way ticket, to South Korea anymore. I don't need that escape because I'm pretty happy and content where I am. Although I mean I would still love to like, hop on a plane with you and go to some other country, but I would be doing it for different reasons. I would be doing it because I wanted to go, because I wanted the experience, not because I was necessarily running away from something. And I think you have different travel experiences and different life experiences based upon your motivation for engaging in whatever activities that you're doing.
Hell yeah. That was a great. I threw that up and you just knocked it out of the park. Well, I got to tell you, Don, you look great. You were saying earlier
Thanks. So
that
you as well.
you were drinking a lot at the public defender. I can tell that has not been the case now. I mean, you're lean and looks like clear skin. So, I mean, but that's so true. Your travel experience is largely dictated on the reasons for doing it. That's so true. Um, in fact, when I went to Costa Rica, part of my being there was hoping that something would come up. I could create some kind of work that was what my heart wanted, and I would find that. And so I ended up working a lot there when I didn't. I ended up applying for a lot of jobs while I was there. I ended
Mm-hmm.
up doing more logistical, administrative, clerical shit having to do with work than I should have. I went to a CLE in Mexico at one point. I spent like $1,000 flying from Costa Rica while I was teaching English to a CLE in Mexico. It was fine, but I missed out on a weekend that same weekend to go to San Juan del Sur in Nicaragua. So it was like my experience in Costa Rica could have been more fun actually at over 7 months had I not gotten into it thinking I was going to find exciting work. Part of it was, yes, I'm going to have some fun there, but a lot of it was I'm going to make it really hard on myself to thrive here, and then I'm also going to find a great job for when I get home. And both of the job thing didn't happen. The making it hard on myself so I can just have the confidence to say I made it in another country kind of happened. Yeah. So my experience there was not everything it could have been because of that. I wonder how we apply that today. I also think going to a different environment can awaken things inside of us. There's a passage in a book that I've read through in another one of the YouTube videos on this channel, and it talks about how like there's a genetic code and turns on these proteins if we go to a different environment, and people may be the same way. So I think in a way, wanderlust can be. We haven't covered wanderlust. I'm not going to cheapen either of our experiences and call them wanderlust, but One of those can be genetic, I think. I think we'll find that out at some point. And
Agree with that.
I don't think either of us have it anymore. Like you said, you don't have to get on a one-way plane to South Korea anymore. I certainly felt like I had to do that. So, I want to hear more about you. You mentioned something. There was something to the story of how you landed where you were. To me, knowing you since law school, knowing that I would come to you for outdoor questions, it seemed like an inevitability that you were going to go where you were going to go. But you alluded to something about how you got there, and there was a big moment in deciding to become an outdoor leader, move more fully into it, right?
Indeed. Yep. Um, so yeah, thanks for having me back. It was great chatting with you last week,
Yeah,
and I appreciate all the conversations that we've had over the years.
me too.
So yeah, I'm glad to be back here. Appreciate your patience getting everything sorted this week and finding a convenient time for both of us as we're on opposite sides of the country. But for if you're so inclined, I do have a story that I tell occasionally when clients ask me, "How did you end up being a guide when you were an attorney, when you were from the law school, and all that?" So that's a question I get, not infrequently. I don't share it with everyone because it is highly personal. Um, but for the right clients, I do take the time and yeah, I would love to share it with you. You got a little time. I'll preface this by saying I can be somewhat long-winded in general, and the story takes a little time for me to lay it out or fully understand. But I think, yeah, hopefully you will enjoy it, and maybe some of our listeners can find some inspiration or meaning in it as well.
I'd love to hear it. I'd love to hear your version of it.
So, story time. Okay, and um, I'll preface this as well by saying that um, some of the names and places have been changed in this story,
Okay.
and I've taken some creative license with it as well.
Mhm.
But the um, the gist of it and the true heart and the important parts of the story are all true and
Mhm.
rooted in reality. So,
All right.
in 2015, I was living in Denver, Colorado. I was practicing law and yeah, generally like hating that area of my life. I didn't want to be an attorney. I knew after my first semester in law school that I did not want to be an attorney, but I figured like, well, I'm an adult, or at least pretending to be one, and not everybody has a job that they love. So like, this is just life. You do things that you don't want to do, and so that's the way I thought it was. And I'd lay in bed at night and lament my life and that at least the professional portion of it. And during the day, I would sit at my desk and review documents or prepare for court hearings, and I would look out the window at the front range of the Rocky Mountains there on the west side of Denver, and I just stare at those mountains and wish I was there and not sitting at that desk, not sitting in a courtroom. And one of the ways that I coped with my overwhelming unhappiness in that professional aspect of my life was by escaping to those mountains on the weekends. I had a good friend that lived nearby that I had grown up with in Georgia, and he loved the mountains as much as I did. And so we had this wild idea that we were going to climb all the 14,000-foot peaks in Colorado. And so we were going out on the weekends, knocking off big mountains in our pursuit of that quest. And we had a couple close calls along the way. One day I fell like off of a ledge off the mountain. That could have been really bad. It wasn't, but it could have been. One time he got frostbite pretty bad. I'd never experienced frostbite, and they did not know how extremely excruciatingly painful that can be. We were on the drive home after that frostbite incident, and we kind of had a heart to heart conversation. I had a girlfriend, he had a wife and a young child, It's just like, what are we doing? I mean, we started with the easy mountains. We've kind of gotten those out of the way. We're moving on to the more difficult ones, and we've already had these two encounters. One of us needs some sort of medical training if we're going to continue to do this, so that we know what to do when the shit hits the proverbial fan. And so he agreed. But like I said, he had a wife and young kids, so it wasn't super practical for him. But I was really, driven by this idea of like, we've got to know what to do if something bad happens. So I started exploring, backcountry medicine, wilderness medicine, things like that. And I discovered an institution known as the National Outdoor Leadership School, more affectionately known in the outdoor world as NOLS, NOLS. NOLS is kind of the gold standard in the outdoor industry for wilderness and medicine, backcountry expeditions. And they offer a variety of courses all the way from like wilderness first aid up to, wilderness EMT. And I settled on a course kind of in the middle of those two known as a wilderness first responder course. This is a 2-week course. This particular one was being hosted in Lake Tahoe. And so I took a little time off work, left my girlfriend behind, and went to Lake Tahoe for a couple of weeks. And those 2 weeks in Lake Tahoe were one of the most transformative experiences of my life. At the time, I was in my late 30s, and at that course, I was surrounded by people who had a similar mindset as me, although most of them were much younger than me. Most of them were fresh out of college, were looking to pursue a position as a guide in the outdoor industry, and the Wilderness First Responder certification is kind of your ticket. A lot of guide companies require Wilderness First Responder certification or higher before they even consider you as a guide. And those 2 weeks there, it was magical. I shared a cabin with a bunch of these 22-year-olds. We sat in class, during the day and learned about how to treat snake bites and how to treat hypothermia and, how to reset a dislocated limb. And in the afternoons when we were out of class, we would go hiking, we go slacklining, we go cliff jumping. It's just a absolute incredible 2 weeks. I learned so much, made some lifelong friends. And at the end of those 2 weeks, I took my new Wilderness First Responder certification and I went back to Denver and went back to, sitting at my desk, looking at a computer, tugging at my tie in a courtroom, looking out the window, looking at those mountains, just thinking, I hate this. I don't want to do this. I hate this. And it was just like that. That was my day to day, life. It was just, I remember so fondly, like sitting in a nice big, cushion leather chair, wearing, nice silk suit, and just tugging at my tie, looking out that window, being like, I don't want to do this. Lay awake at night, just hating it. And so one day, I had a court hearing, and in that particular court hearing, the judge dressed me down for something that I felt was not my fault. Really let me have it in front of my client, court reporter, staff, and everything. Just kind of humiliated me there in the courtroom. And I went back, to my desk, sat back down, looked out the window, tugged at that tie, just so frustrated. That exact same day, I had a friend in town for a work trip who had reached out to me and asked if I wanted to go eat lunch with him. And I had turned him down because I had a meeting with a client that day at lunch. And I was like, I can't do it. So I'm there sitting at my desk waiting for this client to come in so we can have our pre-court conference. And client's supposed to be there at 12 o'clock. 12 o'clock rolls around. No client. 12:05, no client. 12:15, no client. Essentially, I got no call, no showed. So I'm sitting there at that desk, and I'm just so pissed off at all of it. I don't like the job. I'm humiliated with what happened earlier in the day with the judge berating me in the courtroom. And now one of my friends is having lunch, few miles away while I'm sitting in at my desk waiting for a client that didn't come. And I remember so vividly the frustration of that day. It was like, okay, well, I got, 45 minutes before my next, calendar appointment. I guess I'll go through some emails. So I'm going through emails, and at the time, perhaps still, Knowles or the National Outdoor Leadership School would put you on an email listserv once you were an alumni of one of their courses, and they would send job listings for guide companies that were looking for people with those certifications. And that day, there was one of those emails from Knowles in my inbox, and normally most of those I deleted because, again, I'm an attorney. This is what I do. I'm looking for a job in the outdoor industry, so I would just delete those emails. But that day, a combination of frustration and intrigue for the name of the company that had submitted the job request. The name of the company was the Mountain Institute. I could see that on the tagline there on the email subject line, Mountain Institute. And that caught my eye because, I love mountains. I'm sitting here, looking out a window at mountains. Yeah, okay, so I clicked it. And the job description said, the Mountain Institute is a nonprofit institution headquartered in Washington, D.C. Our mission is to educate and preserve natural environments. And the way we do that is by taking middle and high school students on backpacking trips. The Mountain Institute has a campus in West Virginia, in the Appalachian Mountains, widely considered one of the oldest mountain ranges in the world. The Mountain Institute also had a campus in Peru, in the Andes, the longest mountain range in the world. And they have a campus in Nepal, in the Himalayas, the highest mountain range in the world. And the job description read that when you work at the Mountain Institute, you can live, work, and play in all of these environments. And I was captivated. That sounds amazing. I could I hiked the Appalachian Trail, or 1,400 miles of it in between college and grad school. So I was familiar with that area where they were taking, those kids backpacking. And, I knew about the Himalayas, the Andes, and I read further on, again, based largely on my frustration. Not that I really wanted to do this. It's just I didn't want to do what I was doing. And so I read further, and it said, the Mountain Institute is currently hiring instructors for our upcoming spring season. We're looking for instructors that will come and live on our campus and take these middle and high school students on backpacking trips. And on an impulse, on a whim, again, fueled from frustration, I clicked apply now and asked for a resume and a cover letter. And I had both of those, had a resume and didn't have anything relevant to guide experience on it. So I pulled up a resume on my computer and I edited it. I put in, that I'd hiked the Appalachian Trail and that I had a, passion for guide work. And I pulled up that cover letter and put much of that same stuff in the cover letter. I said, I'm just driven to, work with today's youth to help preserve our natural environments. And it was just a bunch of shit. I didn't want to do that. I just didn't want to do what I was doing. And, I sent off my application and promptly forgot about it and went back to tugging at that tie and looking out that window and just wishing I was anywhere other than where I was. And a few days later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered the phone, and the lady on the other end identified herself. And she's like, this is Melinda Lambert calling from the Mountain Institute. I'm trying to get in touch with Maxie Johnson. And it's like, well, this is him. And she was like, Maxie, I received an application from you last week, and I just wanted to ask, I'll be quite blunt with this. She was like, did you intend to send this to me? And I was like, well, yeah, Melinda, sure, of course I did. Well, why do you ask? And she She said, well, it's just kind of strange. I don't normally receive applications from attorneys. It's a little weird. And I was like, oh, yeah, okay. And I kind of like, went back to that cover letter, and it's like, yeah, it's really my passion to work with, to lead backpacking trips. And, told her a little bit how I was discontented with, my current position, and how I was looking for something more fulfilling in life, which was true, but not in that particular regard. And she's like, all right, Maxie, well, if you got a little time, we can chat. It's like, sure. And so she proceeded to tell me about the position, and she told me that the Mountain Institute was located at the base of Spruce and Knob, which was the highest point in West Virginia, and they had 400 acres there in a rural county. And she said, when you work as an instructor at the Mountain Institute, you'll live here on our campus. We're about 15 minutes from the closest gas station, about 45 minutes from the closest town where there's a Walmart where you would need to go to get, all of your supplies and, things like that. You would lead, these backpacking students on 5-day trips, and we provide room and board. I said, oh, okay, can you tell me about the room and board? She said, absolutely. She's like, we provide housing here for all of our instructors. You live in an earth shelter, and, you would be assigned a bunk bed and in a room with 3 other, male guides. And I was like, whoa, wait, Melinda, what? I know what a bunk bed is, but I don't know what an earth shelter is. She's like, well, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a shelter made of earth. It's essentially a mud brick house, and that's where you'd be living. Oh, okay, all right. I got a nice apartment here in Denver. And then, if I took this, I'd be sleeping in a bunk bed with 3 other dudes in the same room, living in a house made of mud. Okay, whatever. Some ways it sounded better than what I was doing. So asked about compensation, and she said, well, we start all of our instructors out at $75 a day. But don't forget the board. She's like, we feed you when you're on trip. And if there's any food left over at the end of those backpacking trips, you can take that back to your earth shelter, eat. I'm like, well, all right, $75 a day. That's not very much, but, let's keep chatting. And so, we continued to talk, and at the end of that, phone interview, she said, Maxie, I don't know. She's like, I think you're simultaneously over and underqualified for this position. She's like, you don't live anywhere nearby, and she's like, I think you may be too old for this. She's like, most of my instructors here are like fresh out of college, and this is their first, job as a guide. Most of them are 22, 23 years old. And I just flashed back to Lake Tahoe and that wilderness first responder course. And I was like, you know what? That sounds awesome. And she's like, okay, well, she's like, I'm in a tight spot. I really need somebody. I'm scared that you're going to come and see what it's like and you're going to leave, but I really do need somebody. So if you want it, the position is yours. I said, okay, Melinda, let me sleep on it. Let me talk to my girlfriend, and I'll let you know tomorrow. So went home that evening, talked to my girlfriend, and she was, of course, vehemently opposed to the idea. I called my mother and, asked her what she thought. She was like, I think you should do it. You don't like your job. Go try this. If you don't like it, you can always go back to being an attorney. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So I called my buddy that I was getting out in the mountains with and asked him what he thought. And he's like, well, what's the name of the company? And I said, the Mountain Institute. And he's like, what? The Mountain Institute? He's like, dude, he's like, I don't need to hear anything else. He's like, you got to go. He's like, that you love the mountains. Like this is your opportunity. Like, oh yeah. All right. So next day I told Melinda, I was like, all right, I'm coming. And so I let the firms, I was working as an independent contractor for a number of different firms, and just let them know I was, taking leave of absence, and packed up my car a few weeks later and drove to West Virginia, and moved into a earth shelter, slept on a bunk bed. The way the Mountain Institute operated as a nonprofit was they offered heavily subsidized programming to local youth there in West Virginia, mostly because, they were located in the second poorest county in the state. And West Virginia is historically one of the poorest states in the Union. So many of those students couldn't afford the programming at the Mountain Institute. And the way the Mountain Institute subsidized that was they would alternate between offering trips to local West Virginia youth and offering trips to elite prep schools from New York, DC, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and so on and so forth. So my first ever trip at the Mountain Institute, I took a group of local Pendleton County, West Virginia students on a backpacking trip, and I learned a lot on that trip. Many of those students knew more about the outdoors than I did. They could identify animals and flowers and plants, that I had no idea. They had backcountry skills that I did not have. But I had nicer equipment than most of them. Most of them I didn't really have any equipment. Some of them showed up with their clothes and, shopping plastic shopping bags and, just didn't have, appropriate gear other than, maybe what they wore when they went hunting, with their father, something like that. But it was an eye-opening experience. And, at the end of that trip, I went back to that earth shelter and ate leftover food from the trip. And the next week, we had a group of students from New York. They were from Manhattan, and this was an elite prep school there. And so these students showed up on a chartered bus that had driven down from New York, and these students piled off the bus. At the time, the tuition for that school was approximately $40,000 a year, which was slightly above the annual household income of the county that I was living in. So that was, kind of wild. And so we took those kids out, on basically the same trip I'd gone on the week before. But, many of these students had much nicer gear than me. Their parents had taken them to REI the weekend before, and they had gotten, Patagonia boots and North Face backpacks and stuff like that just for this trip. Many of them had traveled more extensively than I did. They spoke more languages than I did. But not all of them. There was one student on there whose parents weren't particularly fond of travel, and so he had not really ever left the city. At, 13, 14 years he had spent, in the city his whole life. And one of the activities that we did with those students was we took them out stargazing. The Mountain Institute sits in the Monongahela National Forest. Part of that is designated as a dark sky sanctuary, has some of the darkest skies on the eastern seaboard. And so one of the activities we would do is we'd take them out at night. We'd spread blankets out on the ground. We'd tell the students to lay down, look up at the stars, and ponder your place in the universe. And my job, or my role during that activity, was basically go from blanket to blanket and chastise students, tell Susie to stop talking to Katie, tell Bobby to get his hand out of Jennifer's shirt, like that. So I'm like going around from blanket to blanket, talking to these students, and I go past this one blanket, and the student that I mentioned earlier that had never left the city in his entire life, his name was Dominic. And Dominic was on a blanket by himself. And as I walk by Dominic's blanket, he says, "Mr. Johnson." And I mean, nothing negative like that. That's just how Dominic talks. And he said, "Mr. Johnson, you come down here for a second." I'm like, yeah, of course, buddy. I'm not doing anything but going around, and reprimanding your fellow classmates. So sure, yeah, I'll come down and join you on the blanket for a second. So I sat down on that blanket and looked over at Dominic, like, "What's up?" And he's like, "Mr. Johnson, what's up with all these stars?" And I'm like, "It's amazing, isn't it?" And he's like, I don't get it. I don't understand." I'm like, "Oh, and so I point out a few constellations to him, talk about dark sky sanctuaries and things like that. And he's like, "Mr. Johnson, there ain't no stars like this where I live." I'm like, "Oh, yeah. I was like, so I talked bit more about light pollution, and that explained to Dominic, how everything he was seeing here was essentially above him in New York. He just couldn't see it because of all the ambient light pollution. And he's like, what? Do what now? And so I explained it again. And he's like, wait. So, Mr. Johnson, you're telling me that all these stars that I see right now, I could see them in New York too if it weren't for all the light? And I was like, yeah, buddy, it's that light pollution. It obscures your vision. And Dominic reached out over across the blanket and he touched my arm. And he said, Mr. Johnson, I never knew that. And I've had people take issue with this. They're like, oh, he's an elite prep school student. Surely he knew about light pollution. Surely, that's not my place. I'm not there to judge, what happened. All I know is that I saw the look of amazement and wonder on Dominic's face when he realized that what he was looking at had been above him his whole entire life. He'd just never seen it. Dominic and I kind of bonded on that blanket, and we were kind of, fast friends for the rest of the week. I helped him climb Spruce Knob, which I mentioned earlier is the highest point in West Virginia, and that was tough. Dominic wasn't much of a hiker. He wasn't an athletic person. It took some doing to get into the top of that mountain. We cried a few times and sat down and took some breaks, but eventually he made it to the top. I also helped Dominic overcome his fear of using the bathroom in the woods, which for many people that don't know, that's terrifying for someone that's lived in a city their whole life. Someone that's never had to use the bathroom in the woods, particularly if you have to poop in the woods, that's terrifying because you got to ask your instructor for the poop bag, that has the shovel in it, that has the hand sanitizer, that has the toilet paper. You got to ask for that bag, and then your fellow classmates are going to see you wandering off of that bag. They're going to know what you're going to do. They're probably going to give you some crap, make fun of you. And then you got to go out in the woods by yourself, and you got to find a spot. And you got to dig a hole, and then you got to squat over that hole and hope you can land your poop in that hole. Then you got to fill that hole back in and mark it so somebody doesn't dig that spot up when they go to poop. So, Dominic and I got over some hurdles. That the guy was, getting over some hurdles. He got over some. And at the end of that week, the trip wrapped up and we went back to that earth shelter and charter buses were there, take those kids back to New York. And I'm standing there in a line with my other, co-instructors, and we're getting ready to wave that bus goodbye. And we're going to go in that house made of mud and eat the leftover camp food before we make our excursion to Walmart to buy, laundry detergent and things like that. The buses are loading up, and Dominic comes off of his bus, and he runs up to me, and he gives me a huge hug. And I hope I never forget this. Dominic looked up at me, and he said, Mr. Johnson, this is the best week of my life. And I looked at Dominic and I said, you know what, buddy? This is one of the best weeks of my life too. And I went back to that earth shelter and I got my computer out and I sent an email to those firms that I'd been working for. And I told them I was extending my leave of absence, that I was going to stay through the fall. And I did. I worked the spring season, the summer season, and fall. And fall was done. I went back to, sitting at that desk and tugging at a tie and looking out that window. And the next spring, I went back to the Mountain Institute and I did it over again. And through a series of fortunate events, several months later, I discovered a backpacking company that was taking adults on trips. And they paid more than $75 a day. And you got gratuity on top of that. And you got to stay in hotels and nice campsites. You didn't have to sleep in a bunk bed. So I started doing that while, I wasn't, working as an attorney. So I was doing both of those, for some time. And then through another series of extremely fortunate events, I discovered the current company that I work for, EXP Journeys. And I now lead trips that I never could have imagined when I first started this journey. I pick up clients off of private jets. I have camps with private chefs, private astronomers that tell us all about those stars, through $10,000 telescopes. It's just wild, the life that I found. And after 6 months of guiding 3XP journeys, they offered me a full-time salaried position to come on board and guide for them during the guide season and help with office work in the off season. And so that's what I do now. And last year I switched over my bar license to inactive, and I've made this, my full-time career. And today when I go home, I'll walk in my house and I'll go to the refrigerator and grab a cold drink. And when I shut that door to that refrigerator, I'll look at all the photos that I have up on that refrigerator. I have a photo of you and me at the Mountain Institute on that refrigerator. I have pictures of me with those students at the Mountain Institute. I have pictures of me and those adults on backpacking trips. And I have pictures of me with clients, from my current trips in some of the most amazing places in the world. And I'll take that cold drink and I go in the bedroom and set it on my bedside table. Inside that bedside table are dozens and dozens of notes from students and from clients that say, thank you for sharing the outdoor world with us. Inside that bedside table are Christmas cards from clients. And the photo on the Christmas card, I took that photo of those people. And it was so special to them that they chose, to put it on their Christmas cards. That stack of notes in that bedside drawer is one of my cherished possessions. And tonight, when I get in bed, I won't, lament my position anymore. I won't lay there and think, I hate my job. Instead, I'll tell myself something that only a contented, fulfilled person can say to themselves. Before I drift off to sleep, I'll say, Mrs. Johnson, this is the best week of my life. And I'll say it again and again and again for as long as I can do this. And when I tell this story to clients, I tell it as an expression of gratitude because of people like them who take trips that I get to guide. I get to live my dream because of people who want to experience the outdoors and see those amazing things. I have a vessel through which I can pursue my passion and share that with others. And so I tell them that story from the bottom of my heart because I'm overflowing with gratitude for the position in life that I've been lucky enough to find and for everything that they do to make that possible. So I also want to thank you for giving me this venue to share this story. It's very special to me. And I am extremely grateful for the blessings that I have found along the way through this journey. So to anyone who might be listening to this, it's never too late to chase those dreams. It might take a big leap of faith, but if there's something out there that's speaking or calling to you, or a little voice inside you that's like, there's something more, take the time to explore it because life's too short to be miserable. I truly believe that there's something out there that every one of us can find passion and fulfillment in. It just takes some courage to take that step. Thank you, Hodges.
That's an incredibly triumphant story. I'm inclined to cut the recording right where you said you left that great message. I really appreciate you going all in here. That I had no idea how this played out. I had no idea. I from law school, I knew your email address was Mercer Law Hiker, and then when we did we camped a little bit. Oh, it had to be 2020 actually. I don't know.
It was in
Camped
Pine Mountain.
in Pine Mountain, but then before that, I guess I came and saw you at the Mountain Institute in West
Yep.
Virginia, which was a fucking cool experience. I know that it was short, but just being out there among the yurts and the icicles, I mean, that was cool. And then actually, I remember driving over to see you, and it got dark, and then my phone started to run out of battery, and I was like, "Oh fuck, I'm not gonna be able to find Don." And I don't mean to upstage your story at all. I kind of am inclined to just,
Not at all.
but I remember getting to a point where I'm like, I don't know if I'm in Virginia or West Virginia right now because I was living in Charlottesville, and I got to a building, and I'm like, I guess I'm gonna pull over here and see if I can use their Wi-Fi. Well, I go in, it was a house attached to an ice cream parlor, and it
The
wasn't.
dairy barn. Yep.
Yeah, and so the dairy barn, and I go in and I buy like an orange ice cream something, orange milkshake. And I go, can I use your Wi-Fi? They're like, no. I'm like, okay, well, I don't want the orange milkshake. so so I just keep driving in a direction. Somehow I figured out which way to go up a road, and we ran into each other on the. You were coming this way down the mountain. I was going this way. We rolled down the windows, not knowing who each other was, and you're like, "Oh, drunk! It's Jason." I was like, "We found each other." That was how I found you that night, man. So that just goes to
Yep.
show how remote that place was. But
Yeah.
it's an incredible story. I'm so glad that there was so much emotion and so much tribulation kind of, and I just thought it was an inevitability. You were eventually going to get this right and do the outdoor thing. I had no idea it required jumping, making these couple leaps of faith, but I'm so glad it did because that's just way better on so many fronts. Yeah. And I can't wait to go camp again. And then the next time we went camping in like 2022, and it felt like I would have paid $1,000 to have you there because we were so taken care. I mean, we kind of knew. I did not know what I was doing, but we kind of maybe would have made it on our own, but probably definitely not as comfortably, and definitely wouldn't have had as much fun if we didn't have you
That was
there.
a great trip.
That was a
Yep.
great trip.
So good.
Yeah, I'm so glad I went on
Yeah.
that trip.
Yeah, I remember sitting on the summit of Springer Mountain with you guys, and we were like preparing dinner and, looking at this fading sun. And just like, yeah, so grateful to be there with y'all and experience that.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah, I've bragged about that trip a lot. I think I need to go a little further, stay a little longer next time. But well, I guess a couple things from that story that I want to highlight is one, what's her name? Marlene. What was the lady's name who hired you again?
Melinda.
Melinda. Thank God for Melinda for taking that chance. And I
Yeah.
appreciate her on a lot of levels because I've run into a lot of that before, being overqualified and underqualified. She took the chance on you, and it probably really worked out for her to do that. And then so you actually stayed in West Virginia for like how long in total? Did you stay in the Earth?
I guess I was there for 5.5 months that first year.
Okay.
Yeah. Pretty close to that.
That is so ball. $75 a day. It's like, why bother? I mean,
Oh, no,
I
right?
can do it $75 a day. The company just needed payroll write off or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess, one thing that was mentioned there was, like $75 a day, that there were a lot of people in that county, where the Mountain Institute was located that like, yeah, they were probably, making close to that per day, as well, and they didn't have a family to support, and they didn't, get to live for free in a, or shelter and things like that. Yeah. Just the abject poverty, that was in that region.
Oh, it's chilling, man. And I mean, I like I described earlier, my trip getting up there painted a pretty good picture for me of what it might have been like living there. But you endured, man, and you made it. And I'm so happy. And I thought this since I've known you that you were going to be very successful. So I'm really pumped about where this goes for you because it's a heart centered journey. And I mean, I think the ceiling's always higher when your heart's in something than when you're just either good at it or you're just doing it. Like,
Yeah,
yeah, like a lot of lawyers we know.
yeah. And you mentioned the word success, and I feel like this journey has shaped my vision and interpretation of what success means. There was a time when, I thought that meant a big house and, a 3-car garage, filled with exotic cars and motorcycles and, all of those things. And now I feel like success is being able to sleep at night and not looking out a window and tugging at a tie and saying, I hate my life. You know, you don't, you don't need, all the excess of this world to be happy. And yeah, I very much believe that, like, you know, to be successful to me now just means, are you happy, with your life? Because I know a lot of people who fit the traditional meaning of success that are miserable.
Mhm.
And I would not trade places, with those people.
Mhm.
So, you know, yeah,
Yeah.
money's great and we all need, that to survive. But peace of mind is so much more important. And you and I both, I think, know that from our journeys in Central and South America. That some of the happiest, most fulfilled people that we've ever met sleep on dirt floors.
Mhm.
You know, there, yeah, there's something that I feel like we as a society have missed, um, in the equation of what equals happiness.